last week, the Essenes tabulation, if you see a copy of this, it talks about the time of Christ, the time and shadow in the last days. So, what happened during the time of Christ is also portending the end of time. That means to say, in the end times, what was the scenario, situation in the time of Christ will also be repeated today. And what we will focus on here in this tabulation is the various sects and groups in the end times. So I'm going to write them down here. If you have it's written in the photocopy. The first one is ZEALOTS. Could you help dictate it to me? ZEALOTS. The second one is HERODIANS. The third one is the SADDUCEEES. The fourth one is the PHARISEES. And next one is ESENES, from where I got the word. The reason I chose this word, you cannot find this word in the Bible. This word is found by the archaeologists when they dug up the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what they call themselves. Each one of them has meaning, Sadducees. Not a very bad meaning. Just forget them. One of them is saintly. This I know is just Sadducees. One of them is the enlightened ones. I think it's the ESENES. The Pharisees. It's also a good meaning, but I forget the meaning. Later, we're going to discuss about the type of John the Baptist and him introducing Jesus Christ. Then the types of the apostles. Now, let me repeat what I just discussed last week, last month. The Zealots are a militant type of people in Israel 2,000 years ago. Before the time of Christ, there were many, what they expect as Messiah are actually whom they look upon who will be king and will deliver them from the Roman rule. So, Zealots, in Christian equivalents, there's also Jewish equivalents. So, in this first column, this represents the parties 2,000 years ago. In the Christian column here, this represents almost the church ages. The Jewish column here is in the end times, the tribulation period, and the events prior leading to this time. Of course, you can look up here in this photocopy the militant groups in the Christian era. We have, just look it up in your Xerox, the Crusaders, the Inquisition. What makes them similar to the Zealots is they use arms, they use violence, they use force to overthrow what they think are injustices, what they think are wrong. Of course, this extends to Hitler's Nazis, fascism, communism. Now, why is communism included here in the Christian equivalent of the Zealots? Is because there is a communist in Russia that said that the very first communist was Jesus Christ, because he was a freedom fighter, liberation theology of the Jesuits, and the rest, these use all Christian symbols, Ku Klux Klan, and except the communists, of course, today they're professing atheists, but their origins are religious. Take note, they did not destroy the Orthodox Church when they took over Russia. Now, the Jewish equivalent is what we have today, what we call today in Israel as the Mossad. They are a militant group of Jews wherein they do underground operations, something that is not legal, covert operations. not legal in the government. What does zealots do in the time of Christ then? They rebel against the Roman rule. Rebelling against the Roman rule, of course, the Bible says rebellion is a sin of witchcraft. They rebel against the Roman government, thinking they're doing God a service. Like they have for their patterns as the Maccabees. Who is aware of the Maccabees? The Maccabean revolt, Judas Maccabees and Maccabee. They're the rebellion in the time of not Jesus Christ, the time from Alexander the Great, from the Grecian Empire down to the Roman Empire. That's where Herod the Great became king, because he just inherited it from the Maccabees through marriage. Now let's look at the Herodians. The Herodians, they don't rebel against the government, but they are allied with the government. They are pro-government. So there's nothing wrong for Christians to be pro-government. But they are more of a political kind. Have you seen Christians today forming political parties, lobbying groups? They aspire some form of government wherein everything will be good. We have Pat Robertson. Here in the Philippines, we have Eddie Villanueva. He even vied for presidency. Okay? So, the Herodians represent using the name of Christ. Of course, if they quote several scriptures, some of them correctly, some of them incorrectly. They quote scriptures to pertain about the nation, to focus on the nation. Take note, in the millennium, there will be no single sovereign nation. Everything will be under the leadership of Jesus Christ, the kingdom of Jesus Christ. But they don't have any prophetic outlook in the future wherein the world governments will disappear. Please open up your Bibles in Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. If you could look it up there, it says, Brother Luch, is it blinking? Red light blinking here. Okay, so please shoot the scripture there. Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. It says there that the kingdom of this world, the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So this shows the short-sightedness of these Herodians. Not just the Herodians. The Herodians are mainly political. Now, aside from the Christian aspect, let's go to the Jewish aspect. You know the hero of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. He was a hero of the 1967 war. But he was the one that started when he became president. He was the one that offered the Palestinians statehood. He offered Yasser Arafat, when he became president, that they could have their own nation. The troubles you see today, the trials, they have started by this hero of Israel. There is a political Jew in Israel that only wants peace. They don't see biblical prophecy. Eventually, he was assassinated by a disciple of a rabbi who believed, Zionist Jew. The Zionist Jew, later we're going to see it here, believed that the land of Israel and Palestine, Canaan, all of them belong to them. So when Yitzhak Rabin, he's seen as a traitor, so he was assassinated. But after the footsteps of Yitzhak Rabin, everyone followed suit. Benjamin Netanyahu, he's firm, but he's not firm enough. He also deals with PLO, just to get some guarantees, recognize our right to exist. Okay, you can have your state. Right now they're having problems that Jerusalem should be the capital of Palestine. These are all the result of these political Jews. Brother Branham also talks about that, but of course, it was still decades ago, several decades earlier. But the same problem, the political Jews could be read in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And he shall make a covenant with them for 1 week. That he is the prince. You can open up in Daniel 9, 27. 26, you'll notice that there are two kinds of princes. The first prince that will be cut off was the Messiah. The second type of prince, could you go down a little, are the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. I think it's in 26. There. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's another kind of prince, a counterpart of Prince Jesus Christ. This is the prince of Rome. Of course, at that time it was Titus, the son of Vespasian. Vespasian will become emperor, he will be the prince. But it represents in the future, in verse 27, shall we say, the descendant, the spirit of Rome, that he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, that he is the Pope. That's what Brother Branham said at the Seals book. He, the papacy, will confirm a covenant. Who will be that many? That many will include primarily the political Jews. The political Jews will sell out their birthright before the coming of Messiah. That's why we have a problem. Israel would have a very big problem in Revelation chapter 11. The two prophets standing in the temple of God. Outside the courtyard will be given for the Gentiles to trample upon. Why? The Pope has declared Jerusalem as an international city, accessible to all faiths, Christian, Muslims, and Jews. But the two prophets and the 144,000 have cornered it off. They wouldn't let them in until the standoff. They will be shot in the head. And eventually, the 144,000 will disperse. And they will take over the temple. And the Pope will sit in the temple of God. The temple will be rebuilt then, showing himself that he is God. Thanks to the political Jews. Who are they? The many. The many are Jews that also involves many nations. Because Jewish treasures, or shall we say certificates or bonds, have been spread out all over the globe. Maybe you've heard of treasure hunting in the Philippines. The treasure huntings here, most of them are also in the form of certificate bonds, supposedly left behind by the dictator. So those bonds, there's a reality. This is what Brother Branham talked of in the Seals. There is the riches of the world held by these two groups. One is the Catholic Church, the other is held by the Jewish group. And if these two could fuse together, they control the whole world. So when they make a covenant with many for 1 week, all nations are involved because the riches of Israel are stored in these nations. They will only be withdrawn at the building of the temple. The building of the temple in Haggai says that the silver is mine, the gold is mine. The riches in those nations will be withdrawn. Something will happen to Russia. Russia will fall, but she will not fall without a fight. Ezekiel 38:39. This is a war before the tribulation begins. It's a war caused by this withdrawal of the riches in Russia, but she will not go without a fight. She will attack Israel with 5 allies. The 5 of the allies would be Muslim countries. There are 2 types of Muslims, the Shiite and the Sunni. It's mostly the Shiite type, the Iran, what we see today. They're the ones gonna attack Israel, and during the confusion taking place in the world, the Pope will step in and bring in peace. The peace that he's supposed to bring in is a deceptive peace. So, there is what the story goes. Now, the spirit happening in the time of Christ, the same spirit happening today. We want world peace. They want peace, but they have it differently. The Zealots want to overthrow the government. The Herodians want to strengthen the government of Herod the Great. And even after his death, maybe his party still existed then. The Sadducees want to have peace, but they want to worship God. So this is more, shall say, more correct in their motives than the Herodians or the Zealots. The Sadducees want to worship God, regardless what government there are. So the Sadducees, let's move on here. The Sadducees, look in your tabulation, they are parallel to today's Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant side that forms the state churches. We have Protestantism that holds state churches. There's two forms of Protestantism. The Protestantism, time of Luther, they are similar to the Catholic Church. They're like their mothers, that they control the state. They are what they call a state church, a state-sponsored church. One state sponsoring a church, no other churches are allowed. So, that's why here in the tabulation, you see Catholics and Protestants together. The Catholics and the Protestants are here. And what is the parallel between the Sadducees and the Catholics and the state church Protestants? Let me give an example of state church Protestants. The early Protestant churches, state churches. Zwingli's Reformed Church in Switzerland, Luther's Lutheran Church in Germany, and in England there's the Anglican Church. They're all state churches. Okay? They're not independent congregational groups. So they're state sponsored. Now what is the similarity between the Catholic Church, them, and the Sadducees? They had a voice in the government. The Sadducees only want to control the temple. They only want to hold the temple because everyone brings their offerings to the temple. Everyone worships at the temple. Whenever they bring in a sin offering, a peace offering, they have to bring it to the temple. Passover, millions would flock down to Jerusalem, making Caiaphas very rich. What is so important with the temple? It's the center of their religious life and worship. Even though the Ark of the Covenant is no longer there, but at least the building is there. And what Zerubbabel has rebuilt, and he's got anointed. So everyone recognizes it. Even Jesus Christ preached in the temple. So that's a symbol of their national life, their religious life, the very essence of their being. So as long as the Sadducees control the temple, they're very powerful, they're very rich. That's the only thing they care on. They're different from the Pharisees. The Pharisees does not look upon the physical temple. They have a progressive revelation to see that worship does not necessarily mean you have to be in that place. It's a forerunner of this. Could you open up John chapter 4, verse 20. The woman at the well told Jesus Christ, you worship in that mountain, we worship in this mountain. We're not supposed to be together. And Christ said, our fathers worship in this mountain, that was in Samaria. And ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. That's what the Jews said. So, we have in Israel then split between northern part. They were high-bred by the Assyrians when they were taken to captivity. The Samaritans were looked down upon by the Jews. The Jews in Jerusalem focused, of course, in Jerusalem. When the nation split under, who was that? King? King Rehoboam, I think. Was the Rehoboam, not the son of Solomon, was Rehoboam, Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the son of Solomon, right? Jeroboam. So, if Jeroboam was the son, during his reign, the kingdom was split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And since they don't want people to go to Jerusalem to worship, they built an altar in Samaria. Of course, it's sin before God during the time. But carrying over from that revelation, they focused, well, you have to worship in Jerusalem. This is more true. It's like sanctified seed and serpent seed. The other side is false. So they looked down upon the Samaritans. That's why there is what we call a story by Jesus Christ, the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan was used as an example because they looked down upon the Samaritans. Today, those who we look down may be used of God. And during that time, the woman said, you said you have to worship in Jerusalem. That's what we say. And 21, Jesus said to the woman, believe in the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain or yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. So this is the precursor of what's happening to the Pharisees. The Pharisees had this first. It's not the Essenes, it's not the John the Baptist or Jesus Christ. They had this precursor to this revelation. You worship, you know not what, we know what we worship for salvation of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is when the true worshipper shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. Now, the Pharisees are not perfect in that progressive revelation. They built synagogues. They were the ones who started synagogues. So the Pharisees started what we call synagogues. Maybe I can put it here. It's a carbon copy of the temple in their own place. And it started out during the captivity when the Babylonians destroyed the temple. They have to worship God. They still have to worship God. They recognize their sin. What should they do? They read the law in an improvised temple. So these are temples of worship, but these are not necessarily in Jerusalem. Of course, the Sadducees hated the Pharisee for doing that, but the Pharisee are justified because they were in captivity. During the return in the time of the Persian rule, not all Jews returned. That's why there are Jews scattered among the countries. They still held their synagogues. Even in Israel, even though there's a temple, they still had synagogues all around Palestine. So, what is lacking in their revelation is, the shortfall in their revelation is that they still look upon the place. Like today, the Christian equivalent. We have what we call a local church. What we call a church, we call also a building, simbahan. The Catholic Church, then for the Protestant chapels, churches, they look upon the places of worship as churches. Well, I think there's nothing wrong to say to call those buildings as churches. But churches does not only apply to the buildings. It applies to those who are worshiping in those buildings. But God is primarily focused on us as people, as temple of God. The main worship is in the body of believers, not in the building itself. Although the term could be used like that. The Pharisees started that. Even though they believe you can worship God anywhere, not necessarily in that mountain. But still, they built these synagogues, these places of worship. It's a forerunner of the Christian thinking that you have, this is what I'm going to maybe say in advance, what we are teaching in book ministry. Maybe we have our old mentality, our traditional thinking that we only worship God if we enter a local church premises. That's the old thinking mentality, the traditional mentality. But did you know that worship should be even in the houses, every day in the houses? Worship should be every day in our lives, in the family devotional time.
Private room.
And that's personal. As a Berean, you pray to God, you prove all things. But you have a family, you have a wife. You need to have devotional time with them. You need to conduct services even for your own family. And as you conduct them, the places of worship is no longer just the local place of assembly we gather in the building. It's also your each and everyone's houses. So I just said that in advance to show where the Pharisees got it short, got it wrong. So what is the Christian equivalent of the Pharisees? As what I've mentioned, those are the Protestant Pentecostal churches. These kinds of Protestants are not so old-fashioned as the state churches of the Anglicans, the Lutherans, or the Reformed churches in Switzerland. These Protestant Pentecostal churches, these are independent groups. Wherever they are, they will establish. It's that's not important whoever the organization is. What's important is the places of fellowship. You could have fellowship, but still they made chapels. They made local groups. Another side topic with this is the spirit of Nicolaitanism. The spirit of Nicolaitanism from the ZEALOTS, HERODIANS, SADDUCEES still extended here. The militant groups, of course, they're Nicolaitans, close-minded. The political Christians, they're Nicolaitans. They have their own agenda. They use the Bible even for that. We have religious Christians. They're not really after political power, but they hold on to political power in a sense just to protect their interests. And we have these independent denominational groups. They're Nicolaitans because they look upon their own local churches as places of worship. I mean to say, for me, there's nothing wrong if it's just a training center. so that not just a place of worship, but also how you would learn how to worship in your own houses. But for them, they got it short there. Now let's say, what is the modern equivalent of the Jews for the Sadducees and Pharisees? Who among you have heard of the word Zionist? Could you raise your hands? You have heard of the word Zionist? Okay, Zionism represents the Jews that want to take over Israel again, want to take over the land of Israel, because the Zionist Jews want to be restored, and they're the ones that want to build the temple again. Maybe you've heard of Jerusalem Solomon, the temple, Restoration Temple Institute. So this version, they want to rebuild the temple. Of course, there's the Mosque of Omar, the Al-Aqsa Mosque there. They could not really build it without causing any riot or war, even war. So, the Zionist Jews insist upon claiming the land that was theirs before. They have the spirit of the Sadducees. They are in conflict with what we call Orthodox Jews. I wonder if you've read this in the newspapers. The Orthodox Jews agrees with the Muslims that they don't have to insist to return to Israel. They don't have to insist to go back to their own land just to exist. They're contented with the places where they're in. There are many Jews in the United States, in the Latin American countries, in Asia, in the Middle East. And only in Europe was, because of Hitler, they've been decimated. But wherever the Orthodox Jews exist, they want to coexist with the nations from wherein they are living in right now. They're in conflict with the Zionist Jews because this insists that they have to return to their own land. You can research that on the internet. There's a conflict between these two groups of. Maybe you thought that all rabbis are the same. No, they're not the same. They're in conflict. As the Sadducees are in conflict with the Pharisees. The Sadducees only believe the first 5 books of Moses. After Deuteronomy, they don't believe the prophets anymore. Christ talks about the laws and the prophets. The law is about the first 5 books of Moses. The prophets are those prophets after Moses until Malachi. The Pharisees recognize them. The Pharisees are more progressive in their understanding. The Pharisees believe there's a resurrection. There are angels. There's the spirit realm. The Sadducees don't believe such thing. So, these are more antiquated, more old-fashioned, more close-minded. These are more open-minded than them. These are sometimes even more zealous. They're more carnal. They're after power and money. But the Pharisees are after zealousness of their worship. But out of their zealousness, of course, they've come to conflict with Jesus Christ. Out of their zealousness, they've added more in the law that is not commanded by God. They've added something in the law that's not commanded by God. And that's where they got conflict with Jesus Christ. Now, so these are the modern equivalents for the Jews. And we can see them today. The reason we can see them today is because we are in the end times. Now, during the Middle Ages, there were no Zionists that exists. They just peacefully coexisted with the Muslims there. There was not much conflict. They were both victims of the Catholic crusades, Jews and Muslims alike. But only in these end times, the conflict arose because statehood, they're after for that nation. And these are more pronounced. The difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees in the Bible is the same difference we see there. Now take note, both of these came together to persecute Jesus Christ. Now, before reaching Jesus Christ, let's look at the Essenes. This is the type of what I call the Pentecostal to the end-time message churches. Because you just have to look, if you have a copy of this, look it up at the back. I'm going to read the article of the Essenes. You can check this online, but I'm just going to read for the record. This was founded by the teacher of righteousness. They separated from the temple because of its worldliness. They withdrew to the desert. They lived in simplicity. seclusion. They opposed the ruling powers of the city and the temple in Jerusalem. That would be the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Of course, the Pharisees and the Sadducees formed the Sanhedrin, just to control the government. Living apart from society in constant study of the scriptures. They were more ascetic than those two, the first two groups. With a firm belief that they were the elect in the end of days. These were the end, parallel to our end time believers. To whom would come the messianic figures? Membership in their group were acceptance or rejection of their founder, their term in their place in the ages to come. They were celibate, they believed living with the presence of angels, similar to the Pentecostal type, living in the presence of God, and thus required to be in a state of ritual purity. They were eschatological Jewish sect. Eschatological means they believe in prophecy, they believe in the end times, they believe in the future, what's coming to pass. And take note, as true believers in the end times, we have to be also eschatological. We're getting what's correct in them. We have to look through prophecy. We don't just attend church just for personal revival. We're also looking through windows of prophecy. We're looking at what's going to take place. And they believe they alone, those living in the time, would be saved. The apocalypticism of Essenes and early Christians had many similarities. Okay, now this is discussed about. Now, why is the word Essenes not found in scriptures? It's because most of them converted to the group of John the Baptist, then the others to the Christian sect. Of course, this goes on to the apostles. They are not existing in the Bible as the word Essenes. But in the Bible, you can look up the word, the way. Again, right in here. The way. So there's a group there, separate from the Sadducees, the Pharisees, but not a very obscure group. They live in the desert. So these groups were the forerunners of today's Christian churches in the time of the apostles. Now, how do we know that? I'll give an example. You know, in the book of Acts, early Christians in Jerusalem, in Israel, they brought together all their properties, their assets.
Book of Acts.
You know that?
Yes.
All things in common. That's the very first communism. So they distributed to whom, to each and every one to whom they will have need. There are some copycats here in the Philippines. Have you heard of Ruben and Cleo, PBMA? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay. The way when they have their converts, of course it was some kind of witchcraft or supernatural way. They will tell the convert to bring all their properties into their place, somewhere in Surigao, I think. And they will just live in the mountains in a simple farmer's life. And all riches will be collected to that family, the Cleo's family. They will just have it distributed. Eventually they became a town, they became a mayor. Of course they developed a city there. But what I'm saying is, that was the first time in the book of Acts. The book of Acts was not the first by accident that took place. The reason the book of Acts, the Essenes were there, the reason in the book of Acts, that's in chapter 4 or 5, I think. When the Christians brought together their riches, it's because the Essenes has been doing that 100 years earlier. It's just, what they're doing is just a carryover. So that kind of practice of bringing together all their goods to be dispensed to everyone that has need, it's a practice started by the Essenes. Another practice, baptism. The Essenes were the first ones to baptize converts. If you're baptized, you will be immersed. Take note, baptism during the time of Christ takes place a lot of times. It's even money-making business for Caiaphas because he built a good pool, everyone, before they worship in the temple. Have you noticed Muslims washing their face before worshiping or praying to God? The same thing with the Jews. They have to pass through an immersion pool before going to the temple. Now, it's a very common practice to be immersed. It's a spin-off from the Pharisees practice. From the Levitical practice of the priest. Before they go into the tabernacle, they have to wash themselves, the laver, the golden laver. So, when they baptized people, of course, the Essenes, when they got converts, they also got rebaptized. It's very common to get rebaptized. Those that were converted in the group of John, they were baptized. Those that were converted in the group of Christ, they were rebaptisms. Please open up John chapter 4. The Bible mentions a part of that. 4:1, 2. It mentions about baptism. There's a group of John the Baptist. There's a group of Jesus Christ. The group of Jesus Christ, when the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not but his disciples, he left Judea and departed to Galilee. Okay, take note. Let's go up to verse 1. More disciples than John. Have you noticed that? Baptized more disciples than John. It was common practice then to be rebaptized in joining a certain group. But it's not wrong, it's not uncommon. Every day when you go to worship, you got baptized. Now, baptism will be used symbolically for the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But the Essenes were the first ones to practice that. John the Baptist carried that over. So, these were almost like a Christian in their upbringing. That's why the name does not exist in the Bible. Finally, have you read in the Bible, Christ sent out the 70 or missionaries, and if ever a household will reject their message, what will they do? They will wipe off dust off their feet outside the house. That's the practice of the Essenes. Okay, so we have proof here, because how do we know that? It to be read in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Essenes were the, shall we say, the forerunner of the Christian groups that will, this will, since Israel will be destroyed, then these groups will continue on, which will become Christianity. Now, the Essenes represents the Pentecostal end-time churches of today, those that expect the soon coming of Jesus Christ. There was the Y2K scare among the Pentecostals, believing on those technologies. We have also a message from the prophet. But the prophet, of course, will have the type from John the Baptist. Before William Branham, there were ministers among the Pentecostal churches that want to be the Elijah. Who have heard of John Alexander Dowie? He was the one who first claimed to be the Elijah. Of course, with the Spirit, anyone could have that kind of spirit, but we're talking of, for the Gentiles, the finality of that Spirit. The eventual finality, of course, will be the two-prophet ministry. Later, I'm going to put it out. What is the Jewish equivalent for the Essenes? We have it here. Let's look it up in our tabulation. Messianic Jews. So there are Jews today. There are Jews today that expect the coming of the Messiah. Let me differentiate this Messianic Jew from the Jewish groups. Let me differentiate this Messianic Jews from the Jewish groups. It's not Jewish groups. The Gentile groups that's claiming to be Jews. Brother Omar has a chance to meet up with some of them. These are Jews that are looking forward for the coming of the Messiah. They're not the Jews, they're not the groups today that call themselves Messianics that believe we have to just go back to Hebrew language, Hebrew cultures. Okay, that will be in the Bible when they will be awaiting the soon coming of the Messiah. This will be Israel. This will be the groups, this will be the forerunner of the 144,000. And let's talk about John the Baptist. John the Baptist represented the ministry of Brother Branham. Of course, he was the exact type and shadow. This is for the Gentiles. This is for the Gentiles. Malachi 4:5-6b. But we know B extends to Israel. Here in Israel, we have one of the two prophets. the parallelism of John the Baptist during their time. As John the Baptist will be put to death, they will also be put to death. Our prophet was not put to death. He was just taken by God for circumstance. I'd like to say something in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. Okay. So I have to cut it off. Maybe next time. Sure, let's do this. Praise God.